The Birdcage Theater was always a place of ghosts. The bullet holes in its walls whispered of poker games gone bad and arguments that ended in blood. But tonight, there was something different in the stale air of the old saloon. The restoration. Crew had just finished tearing down a rotting section of the back wall when they found it. A small, leather-bound journal, tucked behind the crumbling wood, as though someone had wanted it never to be seen again. The cover bore no title, only a stain the color of dried blood. The first page was worse. It held a list of names, many of them known to historians: Curly Bill Brocious, Johnny Ringo, Ike Clanton, but some had been crossed out with such fury the paper tore beneath the ink. And at the top, written in elegant, almost delicate handwriting, was a name no one recognized. A name that felt heavy in the mouth, like speaking it might wake something sleeping under the Arizona dust. A thunderstorm rolled across the black sky above Tombstone, lightning flashing over Boot Hill Cemetery. The men who found the journal felt an instinctive shiver, as if they'd just dug up more than an artifact. As they flipped the brittle pages, they realized this was a story no one had told. A story about a man who changed the course of Tombstone's bloody history, and yet, his name had been wiped from every book, every newspaper, every family tale passed down through the generations. The last line of the first page read in shaky ink, "If you are reading this, then you have found the man who was never meant to be remembered." Before we jump back in, make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special just for you. Another story, another secret, and maybe a whisper you weren't meant to hear. July 1881. The desert wind dragged heat like a curse across the sun-baked streets of Tombstone. Children chased tumbleweeds. Men sweated under their hats, waiting for nothing but shade and the next drink. Then the stagecoach pulled in creaking, coughing dust into the air, and from it stepped a man no one had seen before. He wore black, not the stylish kind, but worn and wind-bitten like the desert itself had sewn it. No gun on his hip, no luggage in his hands. Just a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and eyes that never seemed to blink. The townsfolk noticed immediately, though none of them admitted it aloud. The moment he stepped off that coach, the breeze stopped. The heat pressed down harder, and the shadows stretched just a little farther than they should have. He introduced himself simply as Gray, no first name, no last. Just Gray. When asked his business in Tombstone, he smiled thinly and replied, "I'm here for what's owed." He rented a room above the old gunsmith's shop, room number 3. The next morning, the shopkeeper's dog, known for barking at anything that moved, was found dead on the porch. No wounds. Just stiff as stone, eyes wide, tongue out. Gray spent his days walking the dusty streets, saying little, watching much. He sat at the far end of every saloon, ordered no drinks, spoke to no one unless spoken to. But when someone did speak, like young Louis Hatcher, the bartender's cousin, they'd walk away pale, unsettled. Louis couldn't sleep that night. By morning, he was gone. Vanished. At first, no one connected the dots. Tombstone had seen its share of drifters and deaths. But by the end of that week, 3 more townspeople had disappeared or turned up dead. No cause, no violence, just wrongness. The undertaker said the bodies were ice cold, despite the heat. The priest muttered prayers faster than usual, and the dogs in town began to howl at nothing. Something had changed the moment Gray arrived. No one could explain it. But deep down, they all felt it. Tombstone had welcomed something it could never uninvite. It happened at 11:41 a.m. The sun hung over Tombstone like a loaded pistol. The wind picked up for the first time in days, and the church bell let out a single hollow chime, though no one had pulled its rope. Inside the Golden Spurs saloon, a gambler named Ellis Fingers Mallory was winning too much as usual. 5 aces, they whispered. No one cheated like Ellis and lived long, but luck or fear kept The bullets in the guns that morning. Gray watched from his usual place at the corner table. No drink, no food, no cards. Just watching. Always watching. Ellis noticed him after his third win. His laughter dropped. The confidence in his voice slurred just slightly. He leaned toward the dealer and whispered, "Why's that fella looking at me like he's picking my coffin?" The dealer didn't answer. Gray's gaze was heavy, like the heat outside had found a place to sit indoors. At 11:41, Ellis stood up, clutching his chest. "No, wait, he gasped. Then his knees buckled. He collapsed, knocking over the table. Coins rolled. Cards fluttered to the floor. His eyes stared upward, wide and vacant, his mouth frozen mid-scream. Not a drop of blood. Just a fine grayish ash smeared beneath his chair. The floorboards beneath his boots were singed, but there'd been no fire. Doc Hanley, who examined the body later, couldn't explain it. "His heart's not there," he whispered to the sheriff. "It's just gone, as if it were never there at all." Rumors spread fast. The preacher said it was judgment. The barkeep muttered about hexes. Others pointed to Gray. He had barely moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't even blinked. The sheriff called him in for questioning. Gray sat calmly in the station. He didn't deny being there. He didn't offer an alibi either. All he said was, "I don't play games I can't win." When asked what that meant, he smiled faintly. Some men cheat death. Some just owe it too much. They let him go. They had no proof, no motive, no marks. But after that day, no one sat near him again. And the town began to whisper, not about the gambler's death, but about the man in black who didn't blink. Sheriff John Behan had seen more than his share of killers, rustlers, thieves, drunken husbands. He'd stared down guns and buried good men, but Gray. Gray made his stomach knot in ways no outlaw ever had. At first, he tried to ignore it. The stranger hadn't broken any laws. No witnesses, no evidence. Just fear, and Behan didn't arrest men for giving folks the chills. But after Ellis Mallory dropped dead, something in the air changed. The locals started avoiding the saloon entirely. The poker tables were empty. Even the brothel girls wouldn't go near room 3. Then a third man died, a prospector named Tully. Riggs, found face down in the street, mouth packed with ash and his hands fused together like melted wax. Behan put his badge on tighter that day. He asked Wyatt Earp what he thought. The two men didn't get along much. Earp thought Behan was too soft. Behan thought Earp was too eager to shoot. But they agreed on one thing: something wasn't right. "You ever seen a man kill without lifting a hand?" Behan asked him. Earp chewed on his cigar. "Nope, but I've seen the devil wear nicer boots." Behan visited Gray that night. He brought no deputy, no lantern, just his Colt and a Bible tucked under his vest. The stairs to room 3 creaked like dying wood. The door was slightly ajar. He knocked anyway. Gray opened it before his hand landed. "Sheriff," he said, with that voice that was too smooth for a man who walked through grit. "Come to play judge?" "I come for answers." "Do you really want them?" There was a long pause. Behan could feel the temperature drop in the hallway. His fingers tingled. Somewhere behind him, a door slammed for no reason. "I want to know what you're doing here," Behan said through gritted teeth. Gray's eyes gleamed in the dark. "Settling a debt. Tombstone owes more than it knows." "To who? To what?" Gray stepped aside, gesturing to the darkness of his room. "Come see." Behan didn't move. His instincts screamed. He stepped back instead. "Whatever you're peddling, I'm not buying." Gray smiled one of those sad, knowing smiles. "It's too late, Sheriff. You signed the receipt the day you let this town grow fat on blood and bullets." Behan left without another word. That night, he posted 2 deputies outside Gray's room. By morning, both had fled town. One never spoke again. The other joined the clergy in Santa Fe, shaking every time he heard the name Tombstone. After that, Behan stopped trying to stop him, because it wasn't law that ruled Tombstone anymore. It was Gray. The fifth death came quiet. Bess Langley, schoolteacher. 32, kind, unmarried, sober as a church bell. She was found sitting upright at her desk before dawn, eyes wide, mouth open, as if frozen mid-word. Her inkwell was spilled across the lesson plan for that day's simple arithmetic, but the letters on the page had twisted and bled into strange symbols no one could read. And again, the ash. This time, it was spread across the floor in a wide, precise circle, drawn perfectly around her desk, like some kind of ritual mark. The windows were locked from the inside, no signs of a break-in. The sheriff barely had the stomach to step inside the room. The priest from St. Michael's, Father Cortes, was called in. He walked out 10 minutes later, drenched in sweat despite the morning chill. His voice trembled as he clutched his crucifix tighter than ever. "Before, this isn't natural," he whispered. "This is Chindi." The townspeople fell into a hush at the word. Most didn't understand it, but those who'd lived long enough in Arizona territory knew. Chindi was an Apache word for a spirit that lingered after death, a shadow left behind, malevolent and cold. The kind of ghost that didn't haunt places. It haunted people. The local Apache, once friendly enough to trade goods or offer warnings about bandit trails, stopped coming into town. Some swore they saw smoke rising in strange patterns above Tombstone. Others claimed they heard distant drums at night, drums that weren't there. Gray, meanwhile, continued walking the streets like nothing had changed. He passed the blacksmith and nodded. He stood at Boot Hill Cemetery, staring at the graves for hours. He lingered outside the schoolhouse the day after Bess Langley was buried, just watching it, always watching. He never touched anything, never harmed a soul in public. But every night he left a building, something inside it broke. Lamps shattered. Mirrors cracked. Clocks stopped. People whispered his name now, but only in private. The saloon girls crossed themselves when he passed. Horses reared without cause. And children were kept inside after sundown. Tombstone wasn't dying, it was rotting. From the inside. And the man named Gray, who wasn't aging, wasn't sleeping, wasn't blinking, wasn't just killing people. He was unraveling the soul of the town. Her name was Lucinda Knox, but everyone in Tombstone called her Lucky Lucy. She was the kind of saloon girl that left men stammering and wives sharpening knives. Red curls, lips like sin, and a laugh that could make a miner give up gold for gossip. Lucy wasn't scared of much. But after the night she spent with Gray, she didn't laugh anymore. She'd seen him night after night, always watching, always quiet. Most men ogled. Gray didn't. He studied people like they were questions with wrong answers. She found it strange at first, then flattering. So one night, full of whiskey and bad decisions, Lucy walked right up to him, dropped herself into his lap and said, "You gonna stare at me all year or buy me a drink?" Gray didn't smile. He simply looked her in the eye and said, "Do you really want me to?" They left together that night. She didn't come downstairs until morning. And when she did, her eyes were wrong, wide, glassy, like she was looking through people instead of at them. The other girls noticed it first. Lucy didn't joke, didn't smile, just sat by the window of her room above the saloon, staring into the street with her hands folded in her lap. She wouldn't answer questions, wouldn't eat. When asked what happened that night, she simply whispered, "He told me things. Things I shouldn't know. Things no one should." Then, the grin started, not hers, his. She said Gray never slept, just watched her all night with a grin that stretched just a little too wide. Not a smile, not a smirk. A grin that never touched his eyes. That afternoon, Lucy screamed for hours. No one could get her to stop. When they finally broke down her door, they found her curled in the corner of the room, arms clawed with her. Own fingernails, blood under them, like she'd tried to dig herself out of her skin. And worst of all, her face. She was grinning. A rictus expression that wouldn't leave. Jaw locked. Lips peeled back. Eyes wide and unblinking. She never spoke again. The town doctor called it a nervous condition. The priest called it possession. The townsfolk called it what it was, a warning. From that day on, no one dared look Gray in the eyes. The women crossed themselves. The men avoided him. And Lucinda Knox, once the brightest flame in Tombstone, sat in a locked room above the saloon, grinning into the dark. Horace Field had been Tombstone's undertaker for nearly 20 years. He'd buried gunfighters, miners, cowboys, children, and once famously a horse. Death didn't bother him. He called it a quiet companion. But Gray was different. Horace began keeping a private journal after Ellis Mallory's funeral. At first, the entries were clinical, as always. July 11th, no signs of trauma. Skin temperature unusually low. Smell of sulfur lingering. But the more he wrote, the stranger his observations became. Something wasn't right about the bodies. Gray left behind. The rigor mortis set in faster. Their skin paled to an unnatural tone, almost translucent. The blood, when there was any, seemed thick. Sluggish, like it had been clotted long before death. Then, he started seeing numbers. Each body had something small, something out of place. A mark on the skin, like an old scar, except the same shape, the same size. He thought they were symbols at first. Then he realized they were numerals, Roman numerals, carved faintly into the flesh at the base of the neck. Mallory had one. Bess Langley had 2. Tully Riggs, 3. Lucy Knox, 4. Each new death carried the next number, and Horace became obsessed. He pored over the bodies, measuring them, sketching them. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. His diary entries grew erratic. He is counting. What is he counting? Not the dead. Not just them. It's a ledger. A list of debts. And he's the collector. I saw him in the window. My reflection. Didn't move, but his did. The final entry was different. Sloppy, scrawled in ink and possibly blood. He doesn't bury them. He takes them, the souls, the names. That's why no one remembers. He burns them out of the world like a name scraped off a tombstone. The next morning, Horace Field's shop was locked from the inside. When they broke it open, they found his tools melted into the floor. His journal sat on the embalming table, pages stuck together with something dark. And Horace? Gone. No body, no footprints. Just a long, thin streak of ash leading from the front door to where his shadow still stained the wall. October 26, 1881. The day history remembers. The day Tombstone exploded into legend. The shootout at the OK Corral was supposed to be the climax of old grudges and lawless tension. The Earp brothers, Doc Holliday, and the cowboys Clayton, McClory, and their ilk faced off in 30 seconds of blood, bullets, and smoke. 30 shots fired, 3 men dead. The rest wounded and shaken. But something happened that never made it into the history books. Something no one could explain. When the smoke cleared, Frank McClory should have been dead. Everyone saw the bullet. Hit, right between the eyes. He dropped like a sack of grain. But as Wyatt Earp stepped forward, lowering his gun, Frank moved, slowly, jerkily, like a puppet remembering its strings. He stood up. Blood poured from the wound. His eyes were open, but wrong empty, like a doll's. His mouth hung slack, jaw twitching. He didn't speak. He just stepped toward Wyatt, arms limp at his sides. Everyone froze. Then Doc Holliday fired again, 2 shots to the chest. Frank staggered, but kept walking. It took all 4 remaining men to bring him down again, and even then, his body twitched for a full minute after he hit the dirt. People screamed, ran. The surviving cowboys vanished into the hills. Only one man stayed to watch, calm as still water. Gray. He stood atop a nearby rooftop, silhouetted by the midday sun. His coat didn't move with the wind. His face held no expression, just those dark eyes. After the shootout, Wyatt Earp reported it to Sheriff Behan, but left out the part about Frank standing up. So did Doc, so did Virgil. Because when they tried to talk about it, the words didn't come out right. It was like their mouths forgot how to say what they'd seen. Later that night, Wyatt visited the undertaker's shop. He found Horace Field was missing, but something else had been left in Frank McLaury's mouth, a coin. Blackened and melted, marked with a single character carved into its surface, a Roman numeral, 8. That was when Wyatt knew. This wasn't just death, this was something using death, and it was counting. The man who came forward was half dead already. His name was Mateo Dust Eye Rojas, a prospector who lived in a shack 3 miles south of Tombstone. He hadn't been seen in town for years. Rumor said he'd gone mad digging for silver that didn't exist. But the night after the OK Corral shootout, he stumbled into town with his clothes torn, face sunburnt raw, and eyes wide as the moon. He didn't ask for water. He didn't ask for help. He asked for Gray. When the townsfolk refused, he stood in the center of Allen Street, turned toward Boot Hill Cemetery, and shouted into the wind, "I know what you are. I saw it, you bastard." They brought him to the jailhouse, but Behan didn't lock the cell. Dust Eye wasn't a criminal, just broken. Wyatt Earp came to see him that night, and the story Mateo told him would never leave his mind. 20 years earlier, Dust Eye had been part of an expedition with 3 other men into the Sonoran Desert. They were hunting for an outlaw who had killed a sheriff's son in Yuma. The sun cooked them. The sand swallowed their trail. On the 3rd night, one of their horses went missing. On the 4th, one of the men did too. That night, there was an eclipse. Blood red, the desert went quiet, not silent dead. No wind, no bugs, just nothing. And that's when they saw him. A man, no, not a man, standing alone among the stones, dressed in black, unmoving. He looked up at the eclipse like he was praying to it. Mateo said one of his partners, Jackson, stepped toward the figure and asked who he was. The man didn't answer. But Jackson screamed, dropped dead. His eyes melted. The rest ran. Only Mateo made it back. 2 days later, he passed through a town near Bisbee. There, sitting outside a dry goods store, was the same man. Dressed the same, unaged, and he smiled at Mateo like an old friend. "I didn't understand then," Mateo rasped, "but I do now. He made a pact. Out there, under that sky. He gave up whatever soul he had left in exchange for something darker. Something older than God." Wyatt leaned closer. "A pact for what?" "For memory," Mateo whispered. "For erasure. He doesn't want to be remembered. That's the curse. He kills, but he doesn't just take life. He takes identity. He wipes names off the earth, like they never existed. You're not hunted by him. You're forgotten by the world." He began to sob. "I remember their faces, but I can't remember their names. My friends, I had friends, didn't I?" By morning, Mateo Rojas was gone, vanished from his cell. No broken bars, no blood, no ash, only a page torn from the jail's logbook fluttering in the breeze. On it, in perfect ink, one word had been written. Wyatt Earp had faced killers before. Men who spit tobacco with one hand and drew pistols with the other. He'd watched brothers bleed, held the dead weight of justice in his arms, but never, not once, had he felt fear like this. Because fear wasn't something you could shoot. And Gray couldn't be killed. That morning, after Mateo vanished, Wyatt walked straight to room 3 above the gunsmith's shop. The townspeople watched him climb the steps in silence. They didn't cheer, they didn't breathe, They just waited. Wyatt didn't knock. He kicked the door open. Gray was sitting in the middle of the room, in a chair that hadn't been there the day before. The shadows in the corners didn't move with the wind. They sat still, watching. Wyatt raised his gun. Gray didn't flinch. "I don't know what the hell you are," Wyatt said, voice like steel. "But you've been counting. I want to know. What happens when you get to the end?" Gray smiled softly. "You assume there's an end." Wyatt stepped forward, gun aimed at Gray's head. "You think we'll let you take this town apart?" "You already did," Gray whispered. "Years ago, when you let it rot." "I'm not killing them, Wyatt. I'm collecting them. They were already dead, just waiting to disappear. I'll make sure you disappear first." "You already did that once," Gray said, tilting his head. "And look how that turned out." Wyatt's finger trembled on the trigger. That's when it hit him, the memory. He had seen Gray before. Not recently, years ago, before Dodge City, before Tombstone. A saloon fire in Wichita, bodies twisted in the smoke. A man walking out, untouched, dressed in black. He hadn't remembered. Until now. Like someone had taken the memory and filed it away in a drawer, too deep to reach. "Why now?" Wyatt growled. "Why Tombstone?" Gray leaned forward. "Because this is where the rot ripened. Your silver. Your greed. Your gunslingers playing gods in the street. The town made a deal, it just didn't know it. And every deal comes due." Wyatt fired. The sound shattered the silence. The bullet struck Gray in the center of his chest. He slumped back, dead. Wyatt stood there, breathing hard. Then Gray opened his eyes and smiled. "You'll remember this, Wyatt. But no one else will. And one day, when your name fades and your bones turn to dust, I'll still be here, waiting, watching, counting." Wyatt backed out of the room. He didn't tell anyone what happened. But he did leave Tombstone a week later. No goodbyes. Number. Explanation. Just one note, tacked to the wall of the sheriff's office. "The man in black isn't a man. And if you say his name, you give him room to stay." The townsfolk had had enough. After Wyatt vanished and the undertaker's shop remained empty, Father Cortez stepped forward. He had once served in Mexico City, seen demonic possessions in the slums, blessed cursed land, even held a dying boy who swore he saw the devil beneath a well. But Tombstone was different. This wasn't a haunting, it was an infection. Father Cortez announced he would cleanse the town publicly, loudly. He gathered every soul willing to come, handing out crosses, candles, and copies of Latin prayers. They would drive out the evil the old way, with holy fire. Sunday came. It was blisteringly hot. Yet the entire town gathered at St. Michael's, the small wooden church on the hill overlooking Allen Street. They packed the pews and the aisles, families clutching rosaries and each other. No one mentioned Gray, but everyone knew why they were there. Father Cortez lit incense. The children began to cry before he finished the first verse. Shadows flickered where there were no flames. The bell in the tower rang without wind or hand. And then, the candles exploded. A scream tore through the crowd. The wooden beams overhead cracked, then caught fire. One after another, the saints. Statues along the walls began to weep, black liquid thick, foul-smelling, tar-like. Father Cortez screamed in Latin, flinging holy water. The flames didn't stop. They spread upward, against gravity, licking toward the ceiling like a reverse inferno. The smoke turned black and choked the pews, but no one could escape. Doors slammed shut and refused to budge. One survivor later said he saw a man standing in the pulpit, untouched by fire. Dressed in black, smiling, Father Cortez turned toward him, held up his cross, and shouted, "What are you?" Gray looked at him with such pity it made the priest stagger. "I am the debt," he whispered. "And this is interest. the roof collapsed. By the time the flames died, St. Michael's was ash, 27 dead, no bones, no remains. Nothing but melted rosaries and warped pew nails. Gray was seen walking down the hill that morning, smoke curling behind him like a cloak. He nodded to a boy staring at him in silence, and vanished behind the gunsmith's shop. The next day, no one could remember the names of the victims. Not even their own families. Not even the priests. The town buried an empty coffin for each one. Tombstone owed everything to silver. The mines fed the town men crawled into the earth by sunrise, came out by sunset with metal dust in their lungs and hope in their eyes. The veins beneath the town pulsed with riches, but the deeper they dug, the more the rock groaned. They said the earth wasn't meant to be opened like that. And that morning, the earth agreed. It began in Shaft 9. 47 men went down. Only one came back. His name was Emery Tate, the foreman. He'd been working Tombstone's mine since the first pickaxe struck dirt. His skin was black with soot when he emerged, screaming, bleeding. From his nose, eyes rolled white. They thought it was a cave-in at first, sent rescue crews. They never returned. Emery's story didn't make sense. He spoke of silence deeper than death. Of voices that didn't echo but crawled. Of something moving between the walls of the mine, not in the tunnels, but in the rock itself. And then, the humming. A tune. Distant, low, endless, like a lullaby sung through stone. The last thing he saw, he said, was a man in black walking calmly toward the mine's heart, deeper than any shaft went, past where light should reach, carrying a single lantern. The rescue teams found the entrance to Shaft 9 collapsed, but not with rubble, with melted stone. As if the rock itself had flowed like wax. And at the foot of the entrance, buried in ash, was a twisted miner's helmet. Inside, written in coal. Dust. 12. The mining company shut the shaft permanently. They blamed gas, claimed it was an accident. But no one went near it again. Even the rats left. At night, people said they could still hear the humming from under the ground. Same melody, same rhythm. And then people started forgetting. The names of the men who died gone from town ledgers. Widows unable to remember their husbands' faces. Photographs in homes with blurred-out shapes where miners once stood. It was as if they had never existed. Just like the others, the mine had fed the town once. Now it had fed him. By fall, Tombstone had quieted into a strange, shivering calm. The saloon still poured whiskey, but laughter had died. The brothel still lit red lamps, but no one lingered after midnight. People whispered about leaving. But those who did packed their wagons and simply disappeared. No tracks, no letters. Just gone, and no one remembered them afterward. Doc Halderman, a photographer from Kansas City, arrived in town during that lull. He was no fool, heard the stories, the fire, the mine. But where others ran from fear, he smelled opportunity. Photographs don't lie, he said. I'll show the world what haunts this place. He set up his camera on Allen Street. Dry plate, tripod, the works. Townsfolk gathered. Half curious, half annoyed. He called out for a group pose. Gray was in the crowd. No one noticed him until the flash went off. The plate developed slowly. Doc Halderman worked late into the night in his room above the general store, humming to himself. When he lifted the print from the tray, he froze. There were the townsfolk, sheriff, bartender, schoolteacher, all smiling. And behind them, a man in black, no face, no eyes. Just a shadow in the shape of a man, taller than anyone else. Standing dead center, hands at his side, like he'd always been there. Doc ran to the sheriff. When they returned to the room, the photograph was gone, not stolen, not misplaced, gone. The tray was still wet, but the paper had vanished. The glass plate had melted. Doc's notes were in pieces on the floor, torn up like confetti. They found him the next morning hanging from the rafters of his room. No note, no chair. And on the mirror in his room, written in something that looked like dried blood, "Pictures can't hold me." But here's what truly unsettled the sheriff. No one in town remembered taking the photograph. When asked, most said, "Photograph? We've never had one taken." Even those in the crowd, even the sheriff himself. Tombstone had never had a photographer, they all agreed. Except the general store owner who kept Doc's rent book, still signed in his name. They buried Doc Halderman that day, but no stone was placed. And that night, his name vanished from the ledger. It stood on the edge of town, just past Boot Hill Graveyard, where the desert met the wind. The Devil's Saloon. No one remembered when it was built. Some said it was always there. Others swore it appeared after the fire, rising from the ashes overnight like a mirage. The strange thing was no one had ever seen it during the day. Only after sunset did its doors open, spilling warm lamplight and the haunting sound of a piano that never quite played the same tune twice. No one knew the pianist. No one remembered walking in, but almost everyone had a story of waking up nearby, cold and confused, with the taste of ash in their mouths and sand in their boots. A saloon served no whiskey, only a dark, thick liquid that buzzed in the throat, and made men forget their sins and their names. Gray was often seen there, not always in the same place. Sometimes at the piano, sometimes behind the bar, sometimes just standing near the door, watching, as if waiting for someone. One night, a traveling preacher from Tucson rode into Tombstone. He was young, fire-eyed, with a silver crucifix and a Bible wrapped in chain. He entered the Devil's Saloon just after sundown. The doors closed behind him. The piano stopped, and silence fell. No one saw him again. But the next morning, something strange had happened to the town's oldest church. The cross had melted, slumped downward like wax. Every Bible in town was missing, and the bell no longer rang. The townsfolk didn't speak of it. Didn't speak of the saloon at all after that. But if you went there, if you dared walk past the threshold, you'd see the preacher's hat nailed to the wall above the bar. And beneath it, carved into the wood in perfectly etched letters, 14, the same mark found near the bodies. The same number counted in every tragedy. Gray didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply watched and waited and let the town serve itself up drink by drink, name by name, life by life. Tombstone was dying. It just didn't know it yet. The town of Tombstone had become a whisper. Buildings still stood, but many were empty. Streets that once rang with spurs and laughter now held only dust and echoes. The desert had begun to reclaim its own. Sheriff Clayton was the last to stay. He kept his badge polished, boots oiled, and rifle loaded, but it didn't matter. Law meant nothing anymore, not here. The people who remained were shadows of themselves. They walked like ghosts, spoke in half sentences, avoided mirrors, and they all feared one name, or rather the lack of it. He was called Gray, but only because no one knew what else to call him. It wasn't a nickname, it was an absence. A blank space, a man-shaped hole in memory. Clayton tried to fight it. He locked himself in his office with old records, death notices, town ledgers. But every mention of Gray was gone, ink faded, pages torn. Sometimes, entire books missing. Even the wanted posters he once tacked up gone from the boards. But the killings never stopped. Sometimes a body was found in the desert, hands turned to ash. Sometimes in a well, eyes open, mouth stitched shut, but most were just gone. Their homes dusty, their names unspoken. One night, Clayton sat by candlelight and stared at his own birth certificate. His own name, and even that began to fade, not suddenly. Letter by letter. As if something was reaching backward, unwriting his life. So he did what no one else dared. He confronted Gray. The Devil's Saloon burned behind him as he walked through the smoke and flame. Gray stood in the street alone, unmoving, staring down the lawman. Clayton raised his rifle. His hands shook. "Who are you?" he demanded. Gray tilted his head. A breeze moved through the town like a sigh. Then, for the first time, Gray spoke. "You already know. That's why you're afraid." Clayton fired. The bullet passed through. No blood. No reaction. Just silence. Then Gray stepped forward and whispered something the sheriff would never repeat. Not because he chose not to, but because it was taken from him the moment it was heard. A second later, Clayton was gone. Not dead. Not lying in the dirt. Gone as if he had never existed. His badge was found the next morning, lying in the middle of the road. The name etched into it had been worn smooth. Tombstone didn't rebuild. It simply faded. Visitors today say it's just a tourist town. A set of dusty plaques, staged gunfights, and cardboard cutouts of Doc Holliday. But locals, those who've lived long enough, know better. They say sometimes just after dark, you can hear the piano from the edge of town. They say if you follow it, you'll find a man waiting near Boot Hill, dressed in gray, hat tipped low. And if you ask his name, you'll never leave. Because that's the secret. Tombstone's most dangerous killer was never caught, because he never had a name to begin with. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels.